He wore the title Attorney General of the United States, but to two airport cops, he was just another black man in a suit. They shoved him, cuffed him, mocked him. They didn't ask for ID. They didn't care who he was. 3 minutes later, a convoy of federal agents stormed the terminal, and the same officers who sneered at him were on their knees begging for mercy. This isn't just a story about racism. It's about what happens when the most powerful name in American justice is forgotten and rises anyway. And trust me, by the end, the entire nation remembered his name. They screamed at me like I was a criminal. "Put your hands where I can see 'em." The terminal lights flickered in my peripheral vision, glinting off the polished marble floor of Gate B14. I had just stepped off a red-eye flight from D.C. Blazer, folded neatly over my briefcase earpiece, still buzzing with voicemails. Before I could even take a breath, they were on me, two uniformed cops, one already reaching for his taser, the other barking commands like I was a threat to national security. I stood there confused at first. I wasn't armed. I wasn't yelling. I was walking. But apparently that was crime enough when your skin's the color of mine and your expression isn't one of fear. The taller cop, a crew-cut white man with a thick jaw and eyes that didn't blink, lunged forward, slamming me against the cold glass pane beside the terminal seats. My briefcase fell with a thud. Papers scattered like birds in flight. I tried to speak. "I'm the Attorney General of the United States." But they weren't listening. Or maybe they were, and didn't care. One cop twisted my arms behind my back. The other tightened the cuffs until I winced. A woman gasped behind us. A little boy whispered, "Mommy, why are they hurting that man in the suit?" And through it all, I kept repeating those 7 words. Like a prayer, like a protest. "I am the Attorney General of the United States." They didn't blink. They didn't flinch. They didn't stop. I was born for this moment, though I didn't know it then. Every insult I'd swallowed as a boy in Louisiana. Every late night I'd studied while classmates got drunk at frat parties. Every courtroom where I'd been called son instead of sir. They'd carved me into steel. They just didn't see it. To them, I was just another black man in an airport too early, too confident, too still. "Is this your bag?" one of them sneered, kicking my briefcase like it was radioactive. "What's in here?" "Got anything sharp, sir?" "Sir." The way he said it stung. Not out of respect, out of sarcasm. "Law books," I replied calmly. "And the Constitution. You ever read it?" That earned me a shove. The crowd was growing now. Someone pulled out a phone. I saw red light recording. Good. Let them see this. Let them see me. The irony was poetic. I'd spent my life fighting for civil liberties, dismantling systemic racism from within. I'd prosecuted corrupt politicians, reformed police departments, and stood behind presidents on matters of justice. But none of that mattered. Not here. Not in this terminal. Not in this uniform America had trained to see black as threat before person. One of them, Officer Daniels, I later learned, pressed his face inches from my nostrils flaring. He looked at my wristwatch, the one engraved with "To A.G. Harrison for Truth and Justice." He squinted. "This real," he hissed, "depends on what part," I said softly. "The truth or the justice?" His grip tightened. "You think you're smart?" "No," I said, "I know I am." 3 minutes. That's how long the handcuffs stayed on. 3 minutes is all it took for the terminal to fall silent, for the whisper to start, for the federal agents in crisp black suits to descend like shadows cast by justice itself. But in that moment, those first 180 seconds time slowed to a crawl. My hands went numb, my heart steady. I stared at the floor and counted the tiles. I didn't shout. I didn't plead. I let them write their own obituary into the scene. And, still in my silence, I was preparing, because I knew what was coming. And they didn't. It wasn't the first time I'd been underestimated. But it would be the last time someone did it in handcuffs. And when the truth finally hit them, when they realized just who I was, it would be too late to take it back. The cameras were rolling, history already writing. And I, the Attorney General of the United States, was just getting started. I wasn't born with power. I earned it, every inch. You need to understand that before you judge the man in handcuffs at gate B14, I'm James Ellis Harrison, 52, black, son of a janitor and a hospital cafeteria worker in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. People see the suit now, the federal badge. The eloquence, they say, comes naturally, but they don't see the nights I cried into a second-hand mattress or the blood I tasted the day Officer Murphy shoved me against a chain-link fence for walking home too fast. Back then I was just a kid. I'd been on the honor roll. Didn't matter. The first time I learned about injustice, I was 7. My father came home early, beaten down, and bruised his security guard uniform, torn one of his shoes missing. They said he resisted questioning after they thought he stole a sandwich from the hospital cafeteria. He hadn't. He never would. That night, Mama made him soup, and I watched as she gently wiped his swollen cheek, whispering, "Someday, baby James gonna change this whole system." I didn't believe her. Not yet. But those words, they nested inside me. Grew roots. I worked harder than everyone else because I didn't have the luxury of average. I wore the same 2 shirts through all of high school, cleaned buses at night, delivered newspapers before dawn. Every dollar saved went into a college fund Mama called freedom money. 'Cause education, she used to say, is the one thing they can't steal, baby. At Harvard Law, I kept my head down and my chin up. I studied while others partied. I interned for civil rights lawyers who could quote Thurgood Marshall in their sleep. When I made law review, the dean shook my hand like I was a miracle. But I wasn't. I was just a kid who remembered his father's torn shirt and a mother's promise. Fast forward 2 decades. Assistant U.S. Attorney, federal judge, Deputy AG. Then, under President Campbell, I was sworn in as the Attorney General of the United States. When I took that oath hand on the same Bible, my father used to read us Psalms from I looked across the crowd and saw Mama. In a plain floral dress, tears in her eyes, hands clasped like she was praying. She whispered something under her breath. I later asked her what it was. She said, "Now you fight for the boys who can't afford suits." And I have, every day since. That's why it burned, standing there in handcuffs surrounded by officers who saw only a threat, not a man. Not the title, not the story, not the soul. They saw melanin and posture and assumed guilt. And yet, as humiliating as that moment was, it wasn't new. It wasn't rare. That's what broke me the most. Because even as the nation's top law enforcer, I was still just another black man in the wrong place at the wrong time. No badge could protect me. No resume could save me. But here's what they didn't know. I wasn't alone. Not in spirit. Not in that terminal. Because I carried every young black man who'd ever been misjudged. Every woman who'd clutched her purse tighter. Every brown-skinned teen who'd been followed in a department store. Every father who'd been pulled over for a broken taillight and never came home. They all stood with me, invisible, unbreakable. There was one more memory that echoed through my mind while those cuffs dug into my wrists. It was my first year as a federal prosecutor. A case out of Georgia. A black woman, 68 years old, arrested at an airport for loitering. They claimed she refused to leave the terminal. Turns out her flight had been delayed 6 hours, and she was sitting in the waiting area with her knitting. She spent the night in jail. No apology, no compensation, no headline. I'd fought to overturn the charge. Got her record expunged. Called her personally to say sorry on behalf of a system that never did. She just said, "Son, this ain't your fault. But maybe you can make sure it don't happen to the next one." I'd promised I would, but I failed, because it just happened again, this time to me. So when those officers pulled me aside, smirking, taunting, flexing their power, I didn't flinch, because I've been here before, in smaller ways, in quieter rooms, in systems dressed up as justice but rotted from within. And I knew this wasn't the end. This was the moment before the tide turned. At the edge of the crowd, I caught sight of someone moving fast. My aide, Parker, 28 Latino, sharp as a razor waving credentials, shouting, "That's the Attorney General." "What the hell are you doing?" But the officers brushed him off. The taller one even laughed. "I don't care if he's the Pope. He's coming with us." That was their second mistake. The first, touching me without asking for ID. The third was about to happen in 3 minutes, because the call Parker made while sprinting to the scene didn't go to the press. It went straight to the White House. And now they were coming, not with fury, but with facts, badges, and federal authority. And unlike Officer Daniels and his crew, they knew exactly who I was. They didn't see it yet, the storm they had just walked into. While I stood there, wrists clamped tight in stainless steel, their arrogance filled the room like tear gas, unseen but suffocating. The taller one, Daniels, strutted like a rooster on asphalt, hand on his belt, lips curled in disdain. The shorter one, Grant, paced like he was on patrol in a war zone, eyes scanning everyone but seeing no one. They weren't just enforcing the law, they were performing power, and they thought I was powerless. "You know, for a lawyer," Grant sneered. "You sure don't follow instructions well." Daniels grinned. "Maybe he's one of those fake ones. You know, the YouTube kind." Or maybe I said softly, "I'm the kind who signs your funding." He paused, just long enough. Then he laughed. "Oh, you one of those." "One of what?" He leaned in, whispering like it was a joke between friends. "One of those uppity types. Thinkin' your tie makes you untouchable." I turned slowly, looked him in the eyes. "My tie doesn't make me untouchable," I said. "But your ignorance, that makes you disposable." The words hit harder than I expected. His mouth twitched. His hand brushed the taser at his waist. I saw it, the flash of insecurity beneath the badge. Because deep down, men like Daniels and Grant aren't strong. They're scared. Scared of losing the illusion that their power is innate rather than lent. And that fear, it makes them dangerous. They kept the cuffs on, moved me to the side of the terminal like I was radioactive. Passengers watched from their seats, unsure whether to intervene or keep scrolling TikTok. A TSA agent walked by, recognized me, did a double take, but hesitated. That's what systemic fear does. It doesn't just silence the victims. It paralyzes the witnesses. Then came the questions. "Do you have any weapons?" "No." "Any substances?" "Only the truth." "You want a sample." Daniels didn't like that. He stepped forward again this time, lifting the flap of my suit jacket. Found my wallet. Pulled it out like he'd just discovered a kilo of contraband. "What's this?" he asked. "My identification." He opened it, paused. His eyebrows crept up an inch. Just one. Then the smirk returned. "This is fake." It wasn't. It was my federal ID, embossed with the Department of Justice, seal my title in bold black print, James E. Harrison. Attorney General, United States of America. But he wasn't ready to believe it. Because if he did, he'd have to admit what he'd just done. I wish I could say I was shocked. But this wasn't new. I have spent my life dismantling the false dichotomy between good cop and bad cop. It's not that simple. The system doesn't need villains, it only needs silence. And silence. That's built into the training, the culture, the code of loyalty that protects the uniform more than the people it claims to serve. Daniels and Grant weren't anomalies. They were products, polished, uniformed results of a system that rewarded aggression over discernment. That taught young officers to see threats in every black face, every raised brow, every confident step. And now, standing before them, I was the embodiment of a truth they didn't want to face. That the system lied to them, too. I remember sitting on a panel last year about policing reform. I'd said something that made the headlines. The badge doesn't give you authority. The Constitution does. And if you violate that, you don't deserve either. I meant it then. I meant it now. And Daniels, he was about to learn exactly what that meant. Because just as he tossed my ID onto the seat like garbage, the glass doors at the end of the terminal slid open and in walked Parker. Again. But this time he wasn't alone. Behind him, 4 men in black suits, earpieces glinting, all walking with purpose. Secret Service. You could feel the temperature shift. Passengers sat up straighter. The air got tighter. And Daniels. He suddenly looked like a kid caught with his hand in the donation box. But he wasn't the only one watching them approach. I was too, and behind that calm exterior, I was seething, not just because of what they'd done to me, but because of what this moment symbolized. You see, this wasn't just about 2 racist cops overstepping. It was about the rot that lets them bloom. It was about the precincts that never discipline, the union reps who always defend, the department heads who shrug and say, "We'll investigate," and the fact that even the nation's top law official couldn't walk through an airport without being reduced to black suspect, possibly armed. The public didn't know yet, but the terminal did. The truth was spreading like wildfire. One woman was live streaming. 2 teenagers were filming with captions like, "Cops messed up bad." And still Daniels tried to hold ground. "This doesn't concern you," he snapped at the men in suits. The lead agent Walters, a friend of mine, stepped forward and said with ice in his voice, "It concerns the entire federal government officer." He reached into his coat, produced his credentials. "Release the Attorney General." Now. Daniels hesitated. Grant said, "What?" Then came the sound that would haunt them for years. The click of the cuffs unlocking. And the silence that followed. No one clapped. No one spoke. Just the thud of my briefcase being handed back to me by Agent Walters. I turned slowly, met Daniels' eyes, and said, "You just assaulted the man who audits your department's grant funding." Daniels blinked, swallowed. His voice cracked. "We didn't know." "That's the problem," I said. "You never ask, you assume, you act, and then you justify." And that's when it happened. The twist they never saw coming. Agent Walters leaned closer and whispered just loud enough for them to hear. "There are cameras everywhere. You're being investigated for federal civil rights violations. Starting now." Daniels went pale. Grant looked like he might vomit. I took a deep breath and walked away. But we weren't done, not even close. They say dignity is what you carry when the world tries to strip you down. That morning I carried it like armor. The handcuff bruises still ached on my wrists. My briefcase had a scuff on the corner now, a small detail, but I noticed. I notice everything. That's what happens when you spend a lifetime proving you belong in rooms that were never built for you. The Secret Service escorted me through a private corridor of the airport. I could see the agents glancing at me, not with pity, but with the silent horror of men who had just witnessed the rules shatter around them. I wasn't angry at them. I wasn't even angry at the officers anymore. I was angry at the system that created them. Inside the waiting lounge reserved for high-level officials, Agent Walters poured me a glass of water with shaking hands. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "We should have been faster." I nodded. Not out of agreement, but out of exhaustion. I looked at him, a white man, a friend, a professional who'd served under 3 administrations, and I saw guilt. Honest, heavy guilt. "You weren't the one who cuffed me," I said quietly, but I didn't stop it. That's when I knew this wasn't just my battle anymore. I sat in that leather chair and closed my eyes. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself feel the weight of every black man who had no one show up, who didn't have Secret Service, who didn't have a camera rolling, who didn't have a title that made people tremble. I saw their faces in my mind. The father shot during a traffic stop, the teenager dragged from a convenience store, the veteran tackled outside a polling station. I saw my own face in every one of them. This was the moment I couldn't just forgive and move on, not this time, not again. By the time I landed in D.C., the story had already leaked, not by my team, not by the press, by the people. Dozens of passengers had posted footage. Top law official cuffed by cops, one video was titled. Another A.G. Harrison profiled at LAX. Here's the full clip. Within hours, it had millions of views. Twitter was ablaze. Hashtags flooded the feed. Arts justice for the AG. Here's the law. And beneath it all was a quiet, furious chorus. If it can happen to him, it can happen to any of us. The president called me before I stepped off the tarmac. "James," she said, "I saw the footage. I don't have the words." "You don't need words," I replied. "You need action." A pause. Then, "What do you need?" I didn't hesitate. "An emergency press briefing. Tonight." "You sure you want to go public this fast?" "No," I said. "But I have to. If I don't speak, this will be another headline lost in tomorrow's outrage." She exhaled. "We'll get the East Wing ready." That evening, I stood at the podium. No teleprompter, no notes, just me, the nation, and the bruises they couldn't see. "I stand before you tonight, not as the Attorney General I began, but as a citizen, a son, a father, a black man in America." The room went still. Yesterday, I was cuffed, profiled, and humiliated by officers who did not recognize me. Not because they weren't trained to see criminals, but because they were never trained to see people like me as human first. Gasps. Pens scribbled furiously. Flashes popped. "But this story isn't just about me," I continued. "It's about a broken pipeline that feeds bias into badges. It's about a culture that prioritizes control over compassion. It's about the silence that lets abuse survive." I paused, then locked eyes with every camera in the room. "And let me be very clear, this ends now." The days that followed were thunderous. Daniels and Grant were placed on administrative leave within 24 hours. By the end of the week, an official civil rights investigation was opened into their precinct. Every arrest, every body cam, every complaint scrutinized. I received thousands of letters. One came from a 12-year-old girl in Atlanta. She wrote, "I saw what they did to you. My dad said you're like a superhero in a suit. I want to be like you when I grow up. Please don't stop fighting." I read that line over and over. Then I called my chief of staff. "Reopen the Policing Integrity Act I ordered. We're adding teeth. You want to go to war with the unions. I looked at the photo on my desk, Mama in her floral dress, smiling at the inauguration. I've been at war, I said. Now I'm going to win. But just when I thought the tide had turned, something arrived that made my blood run cold. A letter. Unmarked envelope. No return address. Inside, a grainy printed photo. Me. Handcuffed. Caption scrawled in red pen. Stay in your place. There it was. The backlash. The threat. The reminder. But they had miscalculated again, because what they saw as a warning, I saw as a dare. They thought I'd bend. They thought I'd retreat. They thought they could still break me. But they forgot I've already been broken, and that's what made me unshakable. The morning after the letter arrived, I stood by my office window in the Department of Justice building, watching the sun rise over Washington, D.C. The streets buzzed with ordinary life commuters, hurrying joggers in earbuds, a street vendor setting up coffee stands. But I wasn't the same man who'd landed in this office 3 years ago. I wasn't even the same man who stepped off that plane in Los Angeles. Something inside me had cracked open, and what spilled out wasn't anger. It was resolve. I took the letter carefully, placed it in a clear evidence pouch, and handed it to Parker. Get this to the FBI, I said. He nodded, tense but steady. You think it's serious? I think it's proof, I replied. Proof they're scared. That letter wasn't just a threat, it was panic disguised as confidence. It was the system trembling, realizing that I wasn't going to sweep it under the rug, that I wouldn't trade justice for peace. And when the system gets scared, it gets sloppy. In the days that followed, I made phone calls, quiet ones, to federal judges I trusted, to whistleblowers I had once protected, to police chiefs who still believed in service, not dominance. I didn't need riots. I needed records, data, and I got it. Thousands of pages of misconduct reports buried in bureaucratic language. Videos stored on hard drives labeled sensitive. Civilian complaints dismissed as resolved. It all began pouring into my hands like poison drawn from a wound. And with every page I read, I burned hotter, because what happened to me wasn't the worst of it, not by far. I called a meeting with the president and senior staff. No press, no cameras, just truth. This isn't about punishing 2 officers, I said. This is about dismantling the factory that builds them. James, the vice president, said cautiously, You're talking about a full federal audit of domestic policing. That's going to light fires in every state. Then let it burn, I said. Let it burn clean. The president looked at me across the table. She didn't flinch. You have my support. Those 4 words would change the course of history. We launched Operation Iron Veil, a federal task force, empowered to investigate patterns of abuse in municipal departments, starting with the LAX precinct that had detained me. It wasn't a witch hunt. It was accountability. We formed review panels with independent citizens, statisticians, legal scholars, even former officers who'd spoken out and paid the price. For once, the system would audit itself, and the people would watch. And the shift, it began slowly, but undeniably. At first, law enforcement unions screamed betrayal. Cable news exploded. Attorney General waging war on cops, the headlines blared. Pundits debated my motives. Protesters rallied on both sides. But then the footage went viral again, this time with a twist. A new angle, a closer shot, audio enhanced. Daniel's voice recorded clearly. These types always try to act important. Those words detonated across the country. Not because they were surprising, but because they were familiar. Every black family in America had heard some version of them. In a school office, at a traffic stop, at a job interview, in a waiting room. And now they had heard them at the highest level. The shift turned into a wave. Police departments from Chicago to Atlanta began reviewing internal policies preemptively, hoping to dodge federal scrutiny. Some resisted, some welcomed the oversight. But no one could ignore it anymore. The people were watching, and I was just getting started. Back at the DOJ, Parker handed me a new file one morning. Thought you'd want to see this. It was a full investigative brief on Officers Daniels and Grant. Everything, their histories, prior complaints, use of force incidents, testimonies from community members, body cam transcripts, the works. I skimmed it quietly. One line caught my eye. Officer Daniels has received 9 civilian complaints in 5 years, none of which proceeded to disciplinary action. 9. That's how many times someone spoke up and was ignored. Until now. Later that afternoon, I walked into the press room. Again, no script. Just truth. Today, I announced the Department of Justice has formally filed civil rights charges against Officers Daniels and Grant under Title 18, Section 242, for acting under color of law to deprive a person of rights protected by the Constitution. Gasps, clicks. One reporter stood stammering. Mr. Attorney General, do you believe this will set a precedent? I looked at her. No, I believe it will restore one. That night, as I walked to my car, a man approached me in the parking garage. Black, mid-60s, work boots, janitor's badge still clipped to his shirt. He stopped a few feet away, eyes wide, hands trembling slightly. You don't know me, he said, voice low, but I watched what they did to you, and what you did after. I nodded, unsure what to say. He stepped closer, then said quietly, You make me proud to be an American again. And just like that, my throat tightened, because I'd spent years trying to belong, to make the country love me back. And now it was listening. But I knew the battle wasn't over, because real change doesn't happen in headlines. It happens in courtrooms, in budget meetings, in training academies, in the quiet moments when someone finally says, That's not right, and in the storm that follows when they decide to do something about it. I was ready for that storm, because I was the storm now. 3 minutes. That's all it took from the moment Parker placed the call to when the first black SUV rolled up to Terminal B. 3 minutes of chaos. 3 minutes of doubt and humiliation. 3 minutes that changed everything. But when that convoy arrived, when those government vehicles swept onto the tarmac like judgment in motion, the world stopped spinning for Officers Daniels and Grant. And for the first time since they laid their hands on me, they looked afraid. Let me take you back there. The terminal buzzed with the usual sounds, boarding calls, rolling luggage murmurs of late passengers. But the air cracked when the engines went silent. 4 black Chevy Suburbans lined up in front of the sliding doors like a barricade of consequence. The lead vehicle door opened with surgical precision. Out stepped a woman in a navy suit heels, clicking like gunshots. That was Chief of Staff Linda Rowe. My right hand, my shield, my storm. 6 feet tall, sharp eyes behind black frames, and a mouth that didn't know how to whisper when justice was denied. Behind her followed Deputy Director Steele, a man who used to run counterintelligence for the CIA and now managed my internal security task force. Each agent wore mirrored sunglasses. Each face was unreadable, and as they marched toward gate B-14, passengers stood frozen phones shaking as they recorded history in real time. Daniels backed away. First, stammering. Wait, what the hell's going on? Rowe didn't slow. She pulled a leather case from her breast pocket, flipped it open, and let the gold DOJ insignia gleam under the fluorescent lights. I need your badge numbers, she said. Daniels laughed nervously. "And who the hell are you?" "I'm the woman who signs your precinct's next federal funding check," Rowe snapped. "And if you don't step aside, your entire chain of command will be indicted for obstruction of a federal official." Grant's voice cracked. "Wait, federal. This is a misunderstanding." "Oh," she said coldly. "It's more than that. You just unlawfully detained the sitting Attorney General of the United States." Daniels blinked like she had spoken another language. "No. No. He said he didn't show ID." "He did," Rowe interrupted. "And you tossed it. On camera." They looked to me then, suddenly small, suddenly mortal. I stepped forward, calm as a stone. I adjusted my sleeves bruises from the cuffs still fresh beneath the fabric. "I told you who I was," I said, "and you didn't believe me." Daniels's jaw trembled. "Sir, if you'd cooperated, we wouldn't have." "No, I said you would have. Because men like you don't act on reason. You act on reflex. And your reflex is racism." His mouth opened, but no words came out. Rowe nodded at the agents. "Disarm them." The agents moved fast, swift, professional. Their tasers, service weapons, and body cams were collected. Daniels stood frozen jaw clenched as his Glock was unholstered. "You can't do this," he muttered. "I just did," Rowe replied. A voice came over the intercom. "Attention passengers boarding for Flight 917 to D.C. is now complete." As if the world kept turning while justice got served. We didn't arrest Daniels and Grant that day. No. We left them standing there naked of power surrounded by a sea of staring eyes and smartphones aimed like rifles. But the real blow came minutes later. As I walked toward the exit, flanked by Secret Service, an elderly white woman stepped forward, hair in curlers, floral blouse holding a pink suitcase. "I saw what they did to you," she said, "and I'm so sorry. This isn't the country I thought I lived in." I paused, nodded softly. "Neither did I said. "But maybe now it can be." By the time we reached the vehicles, the media had caught on. Flashes burst, microphones pointed like daggers. "Attorney General Harrison. Do you plan to press charges? Will you file a federal case against the officers? What would you say to Americans watching this moment live?" I turned to the cameras, face calm, voice clear. "I'd say, watch closely, because justice doesn't hide anymore." We returned to the DOJ under police escort. By nightfall, I was seated across from the president in the Oval Office. "You kept your cool," she said. "I had to," I replied, "because they never expect us to." She leaned back. "What do we do next?" I looked out the window past the rose garden into the vastness of possibility. "We give the people what they've been waiting for," I said. "Accountability that doesn't knock. It kicks the damn door down." Within 24 hours, Daniels and Grant were suspended without pay. Within 72, their precinct was under federal review. A week later, Officer Daniels resigned, but not before issuing a tearful public apology at a town hall meeting streamed nationwide. His voice cracked. His hands shook. But what struck me wasn't the apology. It was the fear in his eyes. Not of me, of the truth that no badge, no union, no protocol could protect you when America finally wakes up. That convoy that rolled in 3 minutes after my arrest. It wasn't just steel and rubber. It was a signal that the days of silence were over, that we weren't going to wait for justice to trickle down. We were going to rise up and meet it. They forgot my name the moment they saw my skin. Not the name printed on the Department of Justice ID. Not the name carved on plaques or echoed through Senate hearings. Not the name sworn into the highest law enforcement office in the United States. No, they didn't forget my name. they forgot what it meant. Justice, the very thing they had sworn to uphold, they crushed beneath their boot heels without hesitation, in broad daylight in front of a crowd. And now justice came walking back through the front door, unshackled, unflinching, and with a voice that wouldn't be silenced. I stood once again before the press this time, in the great hall of the Department of Justice. Rows of flags framed the stage. Above me, in gilded letters, the motto read, "The United States wins its point whenever justice is done to its citizens." And this time, I wasn't just speaking for myself. I was speaking for everyone who had ever been handcuffed without cause. Everyone who had ever been assumed guilty for simply existing. Everyone who had been told by uniform or tone or silence that their life didn't matter. I want to make one thing perfectly clear, I said into the microphones. This is not revenge. This is not retaliation. This is restoration. A restoration of trust, of dignity, of the idea that the law must be blind not just to race, but to power. That justice must not favor the loudest, the wealthiest, the whitest, but the truth. The hall was silent. Even the cameras didn't dare click too loud. I let that silence stretch. Then I leaned forward. And let the record show when the Attorney General of the United States is handcuffed in his own country without cause, it is not an anomaly. It is a warning. Within weeks, sweeping reforms passed. The National Civilian Oversight Board was established, an independent body with the power to investigate police departments and enforce corrective actions. Every federal grant to law enforcement agencies now required public transparency, published use of force data, and anti-bias retraining as baseline conditions. And for the first time in history, body cam footage from misconduct cases was federally protected from local deletion or tampering. The blue wall didn't just crack, it crumbled. Officer Grant quietly moved to a different state. Daniels, stripped of his pension, went on record in a public forum. He said, and I quote, "The scariest part wasn't losing my job. It was realizing I had never questioned how I saw people until I put cuffs on the nation's top lawyer without asking who he was. I didn't clap. I didn't celebrate. Because change doesn't need applause, it needs continuity. I was invited to speak at Howard University's School of Law that fall. As I stood on the stage, the auditorium filled with black and brown students who looked like I once did, hungry, brilliant, overlooked. I took a breath. I didn't set out to become a symbol, I began. But life doesn't wait for your permission to test your purpose. They listened like their lives depended on it, and maybe they did. I stood handcuffed in an airport, not because the law failed me, but because people forgot that law must serve all, not just the ones it recognizes. Then I said something I hadn't even written down. Justice isn't a name they gave me. It's the one they tried to take away. After the speech, a student approached me. Young woman. Hijab. Clutched a folder to her chest like a shield. "Sir," she said quietly, "do you ever stop being angry?" I paused. Then said no. But if you aim it right, that anger becomes fuel. She smiled, nodded, and I knew she would go further than I ever had. Back home that evening, I sat with my mother. She's older now, her hands curled from arthritis, her voice softer, but her eyes still fire. She watched me from her porch as I brought her tea. I saw the speech she said. Saw what you did. You changed something. I sat beside her. "Mama," I whispered, "I just want to rest." She laughed. "Rest, baby, you just getting started." And maybe she was right, because justice doesn't sleep. It watches. It waits. And when forgotten, it does not weep. It rises, even when handcuffed, even when mocked, even when nearly erased, Because justice is not a title. It is a calling. It is me. In a country where titles mean everything he learned, the hard truth to some, his skin would always speak louder than his credentials. But when they tried to break him in public, they ignited something far greater than fear. They awakened justice. And justice, when denied, doesn't fade. It fights back. This story isn't just about an attorney general handcuffed at an airport. It's about every person who has ever been silenced, profiled, or pushed aside. It's about what we do when the system fails us. We rise. We lead. We change it. Because the meaning of life isn't just to survive injustice. It's to transform it so the next generation never has to feel it. If this story moved you, let us know. Subscribe to the channel to witness more truths that demand to be heard. Comment below what part hit you the hardest. Share this video if you believe titles don't protect people but justice should. Your voice matters. Let's make sure the world never forgets what justice really looks like.